All right. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I know I saw a couple folks in the chat mentioning Jonathan tonight. He's actually off this evening, so I'm News 6 meteorologist David Nazario here in his stead, and we're going to talk all about PTC number 18 down there in the Southern Caribbean. It has manifested itself as our newly designated potential tropical cyclone numero 18, just as of the 4 p.m. tropical weather outlook earlier this afternoon, and it is forecast to become tropical storm Rafael within the next 12 hours, potentially, maybe at a maximum of 18 to 24 hours. But regardless, as the description of the video mentions, Jamaica is currently under a tropical storm warning, and the Cayman Islands should be making their necessary preparations right now in preparation, or I guess in advance of PTC, soon to be Rafael, potentially becoming a hurricane. We're going to talk all about that here in just a moment. We're going to go ahead and get started looking at our National Hurricane Center outlook. So this might look a little silly, to tell you the truth, because we have two overlapping AOIs. We have one that is actually going to be, let me go ahead and zoom us in just a little bit more so you guys can see. So over the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, to the immediate north of the Greater Antilles, we have two overlapping areas of interest. We have one that was previously highlighted because the GFS and the icon every once in a while, every other model loop, actually had something developing. However, now we have something that could try to get its act together over the next 7 days, kind of back behind where you see that secondary formation chance. Not the first one that's kind of just over top covering Bermuda, the Southwest Atlantic, but the one to the east of our yellow blob. If you look at the satellite behind that overlay, there's some organized showers and storms that actually might try to get its act together right along a frontal band that may actually attempt to become something a little bit more than just a tropical mess of thunderstorms out there for the Greater Antilles. And as it works its way off towards the west, we will want to monitor that here in the state of Florida, and especially for the Turks and Caicos, the Bahamas, and this should stay just barely to the north for the likes of Puerto Rico, the U.S. British Virgin Islands. It will miss the Lesser Antilles. We want to watch this in Hispaniola and Cuba, but this could try to make a run as far west as the Florida Straits, and we'll get into that a little bit more. And then finally, down towards the south there, if you guys can see that little D down there, that is going to be PTC number 18. So here's the latest forecast cone for it. You can see over the next few days, and I think it's actually going to keep looping. Let me go ahead and stop that real quick for you, and we'll zoom it out. Going to do this the old-fashioned way. So here we go. There goes the cone, and I'll take us on in for a closer look. And you can see that within the next couple of hours, we are expecting it to make the transition from just a PTC. I know it's designated as a D there, as in tropical depression, but in this case, it is not a tropical depression just yet. We still have a misaligned, it is not vertically stacked low and mid-level circulation. The mid-level circulation on visible satellite, I can walk you over to that on Tropical Tidbits here momentarily once we get through the first half of the show here. We are still seeing a really robust mid-level cyclone trying to organize itself. We have some decent thunderstorm activity you can see on the static infrared imagery there, but the low-level circulation has yet to fully consolidate, wind itself up, and then co-locate underneath our mid-level circulation. So if you do see some cyclonic turning, if you look at a satellite that is in looping motion, you will see that counterclockwise spin. However, it does not mean that we are rapidly organizing and expecting anything major to come from this over the next 24 to 36 hours. The hurricane models are doing some pretty spectacular things. We probably will have reconnaissance data ingested into these models here momentarily. So we'll take a look at that towards the back end of this stream, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Let's see. So with that being said, bye, Dave. We'll be back when Jonathan is back. Hey, Miss April, I'm glad to see you. Travel Jet Setter. Well, you're going to miss all the information if you're tuning out because Jonathan isn't here. He deserves a night off, too. He came at you guys with a phenomenal video earlier today. Do we have to worry about anything in New Smyrna Beach, Florida? Melissa, not right now, no. As a matter of fact, once we get into what I call the tropical takeaways, I'll let you know what the key takeaways are right now in terms of what we know and what we don't know. Gregory Goodman, Alabama, you definitely want to be watching this one. That is for sure. Shanice, thank you so much for tuning in from Jamaica. I'm glad to have you with us. You guys are going to be receiving this system first, more than likely as a tropical storm, Lord willing. We're going to have to continue to watch this and see how quickly it tries to organize as we go through the day tomorrow. Hey, David, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if I was, I would be a little concerned that the storms always seem to do what you say they will. Interest and loss. Well, Lee, thank you very much for that. I promise I have no pull or wiggle room in terms of controlling where these things go. That's for sure. Let's see. What else do we have in the chat? This is unusual. Let me get that epic pen thing out of the way. I can't see some of the comments. Ashrith Reddy. This is unusual. Never has been a storm landfall in those states in November in the past. So we have seen landfalls up in the Gulf in November. However, most of the landfalls have been here in the state of Florida. I believe we had one or two in recorded history that did kind of give Alabama a very close shave, but I'm fairly certain that we have not seen anything from Louisiana, especially into Texas, and then back into Mexico, which is what the Euro thinks this is going to do. The Euro is expecting it to take a very hard west shift with the building of a ridge over the eastern and southeastern United States, and that's what's going to cause it to jog towards the west. But we'll talk about that here momentarily. Let's go ahead and go through the timetable, especially since we have some folks tuning in from Jamaica. You can see anywhere between sunset on Monday into the very early morning hours of Tuesday is when our conditions are forecast to start going downhill for Kingston and the rest of Jamaica. You can see it right here. I'll zoom us down way close so we can see. You are expected to see the right front quadrant of this system. You may not see a direct landfall like we saw barely. We barely missed a grazing by the eye wall with Beryl back in the end of June, early July. In this case, a lot of our model data does think this is going to nudge a little off to your southwest, and we can avoid a direct hit onto the island of Jamaica. But then, unfortunately, you fast forward a little bit further, and we have the Cayman Islands possibly taking a direct hit by this system. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting. And I don't want to make anyone freak out if we have any viewers in from the Cayman Islands right now. I have a lot on my Weather Center Nazario page where I don't know if they've come over to the Just Weather since I made the transition to News 6. However, this is where it gets a little difficult to adjust the intensity forecast, because I'll tell you the honest truth, every single one of our hurricane models do anticipate by the time it gets to the Cayman Islands and then by the time it reaches the western side of Cuba, this could be a developing and strengthening hurricane. So the National Hurricane Center may be on the conservative side with this current forecast that you all see here with the 1 p.m. Tuesday, 70 mile an hour max sustained winds in the center. So I want to throw that out there. I want to see what this looks like as we go through the overnight hours of tonight and we start the day tomorrow. That will tell us a lot in terms of whether or not the low and mid-level circulations will co-locate and align vertically. They'll stack on top of one another. That will really start to agitate the environment and get this feature wrapping up and strengthening. If we don't have that by tomorrow morning, we could very well see a tropical storm. Jamaica will more than likely realize tropical storm level impacts, which will still be very, very heavy rainfall. Obviously, winds gusting beyond 50, 60, 70 miles an hour with your strongest feeder bands. You will be on the right front side of it as it travels towards the northwest, so you will be in the strongest core of winds and the most dangerous storm surge, unfortunately. And then the Cayman Islands, we're kind of at a toss-up still. I really want to see what this system looks like real time when the sun comes up tomorrow morning, and if we have those centers fully aligned and this system is starting to strengthen. From there, you can see National Hurricane Center is thinking as it approaches Cuba and prepares for its first landfall. We are looking at an 80-mile-an-hour hurricane. This could once again be on the conservative side, and I'll show you the earlier tropical models. I want to check tropical tidbits. I know we're looking at the cone where you guys are, but I want to see if we have any of our data in on tropical tidbits just yet. We do not. So I'm going to pull that up later. I'll show you the intensity guidance, especially now that we have some hurricane reconnaissance data in there as well, so we can get a better feel for this. So this is what we're looking at as we get into Wednesday, very early morning. Once again, just after sunset, conditions are going to start to go downhill for Cuba and the rest of the western side of the island. And then from there, I'll go ahead and fast forward. We'll get into the Gulf of Mexico. This is where we are still a little bit uncertain. The National Hurricane Center, you can see really, really widening their cone. This is a huge forecast cone. I want you to look very closely at that. This goes from Apalachicola Bay, And I know that the cone kind of stops and rounds out at the end of that 7-day mark. That does not necessarily mean that Apalachicola and Tyndall, Panama City, and the western side of the Big Bend area is not in the cone. If this cone were to continue past the 7-day mark, yes, a large majority of the panhandle of Florida would be within this bad boy. And then if you notice, there is a large margin of error with it being as far to the northeast as the Big Bend of Florida, getting into that Apalachicola Bay area, or as far to the southwest as entering the northern periphery of the Bay of Campeche, kind of running for the Brownsville, Mexico-Texas border. So there is a very, very big margin of error here, and I don't want you to pay attention right now to where the center is. Look at the margin of error in the cone. We all need to be watching on the Gulf Coast from the west coast of Florida all the way through to New Orleans, Baton Rouge, central Louisiana. We need to be paying close attention to this. I personally think we can see a landfall anywhere in this general area, from about Baton Rouge to Tallahassee. If I had to give you a preliminary prediction, I know that's a very wide swoop margin of error, but I really do think that is where our most likely outcome with the landfall is going to be at this point in time. Again, we still don't have a really, really closed off trackable, not tropical, we do have a tropical feature, but a really, really well closed off trackable feature, and we're only just barely getting sampling from the feature itself. We have not gotten the environmental upper and lower level atmospheric sampling just yet, so there is still a little bit of time to try to get a little bit better of a feel for what this system is going to do. With that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the latest spaghetti models. I'll go ahead and get back to playing the loop. You can see as we go through the Caribbean, looking fairly spot on, and I'll once again kind of bring us in so you can see a little bit better. This is as of 11 a.m. on Wednesday. We're looking at this being just beyond Cuba, entering the GOMEX, as we like to say in the Navy, in naval weather. There's a couple of outliers that take this up towards the western tip of Haiti, the eastern side of Cuba. Pay no attention to that. You can see a lot of our reliable model data is locked on and it being just to the immediate south and west of Jamaica before going right through the Cayman Islands. Cayman Islands, again, I emphasize to you, as well as Jamaica. Jamaica, you should be in alert mode right now. We have the tropical storm warnings in effect, so you need to be making your preparations right now and buttoning those up as we start the day tomorrow, getting them buttoned up, which means nearing completion, and then by tomorrow night, sheltered in place and ready to rock and roll for when potential Rafael is knocking on your doorstep. And then we really need to make sure that we are taking full advantage of this minimum 36 hours of lead time that we are getting in the Cayman Islands before this system possibly becomes a high-end tropical storm or somewhere in the lower levels of a hurricane. From there, I'm going to take us down a little bit further. Let me go back to the show here if I can get it to play for me. I don't know why it always does this. It gets stuck. Let me stop. And we'll run it back. There we go. So we're looking at the first half of the spaghetti models. And then notice as of 0Z, we're starting to see them come into a bit more of convergence. Now, the timing here still is up in the air. If you look, a lot of them are showing that westward nudge as it runs parallel to the Florida Keys and Naples in southwest Florida. Then from there, it could either continue straight into the Big Bend area of Florida, which we really... None of us on the Gulf Coast need another system, and let alone in November as we're getting ready for flipping Thanksgiving. It's unbelievable that we're talking another potential landfalling hurricane, if not tropical storm, somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, whether it be from Louisiana. I'm going to throw it out there, possibly as far to the west as eastern Texas. That is going to be an outlier. That is definitely an outlier. That has not happened in history. So this would be making history once again if this system were to go as far west as Louisiana and Texas. Alabama, you definitely want to be watching as well. And then you can see we still have a couple of members getting very close to the state of Florida, the west coast of Florida. As a matter of fact, our 18Z models have all kind of corrected again. I know that the track guidance has it off towards the west, but if you look at like the 18Z Icon, the 18Z GFS, the latest European AI model, they're all kind of hugging the west coast of Florida. So we will likely see winds and rain and some storm surge from it if it does get a little closer to our neck of the woods. You can see where we stand currently. A decent amount of the spaghetti plots bring this in to New Orleans, Lake Pontchartrain, maybe Baton Rouge, as far to the west as Baton Rouge, somewhere in there, with one outlier going right up along the west coast of Florida towards Jacksonville, and then another that makes landfall between Panama City and Pensacola, just to the east of where Eglin Air Force Base is. So you can see again, and I'll zoom us down one more time just so you can get a feel for it, we are looking at a fairly decent margin of error. And when I say margin of error, that's because We have so many different, whoops, I don't know why we just suddenly teleported to fire and smoke. Let me go ahead and run that back, only this time we're not going to have it looping, so I can actually draw for you all. There we go. And if you look here, I would suggest everybody from St. Petersburg all the way through needs to be keeping an eye on this system. Now, I'm not saying start preparing. I'm not saying that. We're not saying start preparing because, first of all, it's November. And if you want me to shoot straight with you guys, if we're just now making our hurricane preparations towards the very tail end of the season, we are well behind the curve. At this point, we should be making our preparations for our Thanksgiving and Christmas festivities more than anything, and we should still have things ready to rock and roll because we are still, unfortunately, in hurricane season and seeing this system traveling this far to the north and west to where it could potentially be impactful. So west coast of Florida all the way through to Louisiana really need to be paying close attention to this. Just watching. We're just watching right now. We still don't have a named storm on the board. We do have a PTC. But if you remember last year, we did have PTC 22 that developed in the Caribbean and then fell apart before it could do anything. That was when we got the 12, 20 different iterations of Vince's forming, and then nothing happened. Unfortunately, it really doesn't look like that's going to be the case here, but, to each their own, to be determined. Now, I'm not going to play this. This still kind of stands. This is a phenomenal graphic developed by meteorologist Michelle Morgan a couple of days ago. I wanted to rerun it because the same option and the same currents still stand. Now, I'll zoom you in again so we can talk, and I'll pull up my handy-dandy telestrator here in a second. Let's go back to this. I always ask that. I got to make sure I'm in the show prep mode before I actually click away from anything. Let's go here. Let's zoom us in one more time. Let's see if I can get it right before you guys start clicking off because I clearly don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kidding. So this high pressure is going to be the key here. Off towards the east. This is our Bermuda Azores high. We have a fairly strong high pressure out there in the Atlantic right now. Now, don't look too closely at where these X's are landfalling. This is not going to be the type of chart where it's like, oh, one of these two solutions can happen. It'll either go up towards Alabama or it'll go down towards Mexico. That's not the message that we're trying to communicate here. What I do really want you to pay attention to, however, is we could either see it come up like so, or we can see it go back like this, and all of this general area is going to be on the docket for possibly receiving whatever is left of this system. The Gulf of Mexico is just a little bit more hostile, especially since we are into November. It's not the water temps. The water temps are still A-OK. The water temps, if I'm not mistaken, the last time we had taken a close look at that were between 84 to 86 degrees. They have come down, I think, in some localized areas further towards the west near Louisiana and Texas, where you're down to about 80 to 83 degrees. You only need 80 degrees Fahrenheit for the development and strengthening of a tropical cyclone. So if we're sitting somewhere in a happy medium of 85, since we were sitting around 90 some odd degrees during peak summer, late peak hurricane season, we're still in the realm of possibility to see this thing strengthening if all other principles are A-OK, in which case they're probably not going to be. We're going to have dry air and some wind shear working for us. And that's likely what's going to keep this thing on a lid. The HAFS models are a little more gung-ho that this thing could try to stay as strong as a Cat 2, Cat 3 into the Gulf, but that was before the reconnaissance data hit the models. So we're going to kind of get a better feel for it with the 0Z run and then beyond that as well. So I need everybody on the Gulf of Mexico coastline, even Texas right now. I know you're not in my little circle here, and you're not in any of the graphics, but even in Texas, we need to pay attention to this because whenever we have a tropical cyclone wander up and park its way in the Gulf of Mexico, it is going to hit somebody. So everybody needs to just keep their eyes on it. That's all I'm saying right now, is we just need to keep our eyes open. So before we go into our third-party sites, this is exactly what I was talking about earlier. I want to show you guys a little bit of some tropical takeaways that I have built here. So for the Caribbean disturbance for PTC number 18, first and foremost, it will likely be Rafael sometime early tomorrow. That is almost a guarantee at this point. I believe before they fully finished up putting their developmental probabilities, we maxed out 2-day probs at 100, 7-day probs at 100. Obviously, we have a PTC, so the formation is happening. We're just waiting for that strengthening curve to begin. From there, track guidance is consistent inside the Caribbean. You saw the spaghetti plots. They're not really going to deviate too much from there unless we see the relocation of the low central pressure moving around down there in the southern Caribbean, which could happen with all the displacement in our thunderstorms. They've been kind of forming up around the mid-level low and then concentrating into different quadrants on the west side, the northwest side, the south side, that might try to act and aggravate where that low-level cyclone or low-level circulation tries to develop. However, as you can see, I have it written down here. Jamaica and Cayman Islands, we need to be preparing. You need to be preparing right now. Jamaica more so than the Cayman Islands. Cayman Islands, you are all lucky enough to where you have a little extra lead time to batten down the hatches, make sure that you are in a safe place, make sure your homes, your property, and your loved ones are ready to go when this system arrives over the next 2 days. Jamaica, the clock is ticking. You need to be going at it right now. You might lose a little sleep, but just to be on the safe side, you need to be preparing for anything between a high-end tropical storm or a low-end hurricane. Are we confident it'll strengthen that quick? No, but it is definitely a safe bet to go 1 or 2 levels higher so you are over-prepared rather than under-prepared. And then last but certainly not least, you can see a lot of our guidance in terms of the track are favoring the West Gulf, staying to the west of our viewing area if you're watching from Central Florida. Intensity and timing are still being drilled down, and this is not currently a Florida threat. Now, there's a lot of caveats to that, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom myself in so I can talk about that because I know it's kind of a conundrum. Well, David, you showed us the track, you showed us the cone, you showed us yada, yada, yada. Right now, however, in terms of a landfall, as you saw for most, I would say 70 to 80% of our current computer models showing the track and the current projection from National Hurricane Center, we are not, that's why I have it in all caps there, we are not currently under the threat of seeing a landfall. Not in the Panhandle, not in the Peninsula, but that could change. I will go ahead and while we're zoomed in here, let me go ahead and bring us back to Links 4. And I'll show you the track one more time. We'll take us in for a closer view. And as you can see at the very tail end of the cone here, in all reality, Florida is not in a threat zone right now. We could get some rough seas, some rip currents, maybe some very, very, very low-end coastal flooding, depending on how strong this system is. Because, again, I do think that this system is being erred on the conservative side based on our most recent model data. And as we all know, we're very familiar with Debbie, Helene, Milton, Francine, Beryl. Our hurricane models, even when they don't have a specific target, like a organized, I don't know why I sound like a pirate, organized tropical system, they still do fairly well for themselves. A lot of folks kind of scoffed at the early Category 5 iterations of Beryl, and that happened. A lot of us scoffed at how they went nuclear with Milton, and we saw a record-breaking Category 5 in the Southern Gulf. So I'm personally, and I know the rest of the News 6 Pinpoint Weather team, are not exactly taking the hurricane models lightly. We're taking them fairly seriously, and that's why I want to emphasize to you all watching right now that Jamaica and then especially the Cayman Islands. I know Jamaica, you're going to be up first, but that's when we start to see most of our intensification is between Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. So the Cayman Islands need to be prepared for hurricane conditions. Jamaica could see anywhere in the realm of low-end hurricane conditions, which is why I would professionally advise that you are ready for Category 1 level impacts. Even if this does stay a fairly sloppy, disorganized tropical storm, you don't want to be caught with your guard down, especially if this is going to come as close as the current model data does suggest and the current cone forecast. You can see right here, 60-mile-an-hour sustained winds off your southwest coast, which means you could have occasional gusts up there to Category 1 intensity, which is why I want you to safely be prepared for that. Make sure you have everything in place and ready to go so you can ride this out and come out of this safe and sound. Cayman Islands, we're going to be dialing this in very, very, very heavily over the next 24 hours to get you guys the information that you need to make the necessary preparations and decisions before this rocks in sometime in the middle of the day on Tuesday. I'm going to take just a couple seconds. I'm going to fade out to the big picture camera so I can take some questions. I know we have a decent amount of people watching tonight. JJ614, hello. I'm so glad to see you here, Nazario. It's great to see you, JJ614. I am waiting for homeowners insurance. This is April Claremont. Also good to see you. Same thing with One Nation Weather. Great to see you in here, buddy. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. Twilight Firefly 100. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight as well. Jermaine Montague. Montegui, I apologize if I'm butchering your name. How strong Jamaica will get it? So where we stand right now, National Hurricane Center is predicting a tropical storm. You need to be prepared for a Category 1 hurricane, though. No questions asked, please. Just to be on the safe side. Make sure you're ready for a Category 1 at the minimum. Judy Tokos, yes, everybody in Florida not going to watch this because of the spaghetti models. We should not let our guards down. It's too early. Judy, it is way too early. We have seen time and time again through recorded history that every single storm that develops does play a role in impacting Florida. We would be making history if this made landfall anywhere else outside of Florida for the month of November. So we need to all be paying attention just to be on the safe side. People forget that even a tropical storm can be devastating. This is April Claremont again. Rain and wind can still cause a lot of damage. That is absolutely correct. Sydney Solomon, just hopping on here. Should Grand Cayman prep for a Cat 1 or 2? Yes. Phenomenal question. I would highly encourage you prepare for, at the maximum, a Category 2. Actually, let me take that back. Let me not say maximum. You should be prepared for Category 1, Category 2 level impacts. NZR Clips, I'm from UK, but in Orlando, Florida. Should I be worried? Not worrying, just watching. Remember, that's the key takeaway, just watching. Needs improvement. Looks like it could come to Houston. Not necessarily right now. Houston is a huge outlier. Houston would once again be making history for the entirety of recorded hurricane season data. Danielle, David knows his stuff. Been watching him a while now. Thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate it. We crank out as much information and quality information at that. That's kind of why we've been so hesitant with pumping out updates on this, because it wasn't until most recently we finally started to get some consistency, at least down in the Caribbean. So it's definitely been, it's been a very tedious forecast. That is for certain, and to say the least. Now, let's go ahead and move over to our third-party websites real quick. We're going to start off with National Hurricane Center. What I'm going to do first and foremost, however, is kind of modify what we have and what we're looking at here, just so I can fix this for you guys and we're not looking at anything silly. Let me see here. So this is the one that I want. Open that up. Open this up. Do that. No, we don't need that. We can go ahead and leave it as is. That's fine. We'll just go ahead and leave it like that. All right, so this is what I'd been mentioning earlier. This is that newly formed, or I should say newly highlighted disturbance. 0 for 20 shot, not likely to do anything over the next 24 to 48 hours, but then 20% chances right now where we stand that this might try to organize into something this time next weekend, Saturday or Sunday potentially. Melissa Riley, David, will be doing the weather on the news tonight? Yes, the 11 o'clock show. I will definitely be there. Weather Naz, some YouTuber on YouTube said here on the Alabama coast we should not be worried because wind shear and cooler waters. That is not true. That is definitely not true. I would definitely not be worried, but again, I want us all paying attention to this because no matter what, if I zoom us down in here, take a look at that. We are still sitting very warm. In fact, these are a little bit warmer than the average I was giving you all earlier. If you look, we have 28, we still have a really prevalent loop current out there, and this system is expected to track over the loop current. We only need around 24 to 25 degrees Charlie, give or take. I believe that's maybe 78 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you look, it's only right around the continental shelf waters where we start to cool down tremendously. But 90% of the Gulf of Mexico is still warm enough for intensification, let alone rapid intensification, the infamous buzzword that you hear probably all over social media. We're not saying it is going to rapidly intensify. There are going to be other detriments, other negative factors working against the system, just like we saw with Milton before it made landfall on the west coast of Florida, but it definitely is not something you want to glaze over just because, quote, the waters are cool, because they are not cool for 90% of its life cycle over the Gulf of Mexico. Pensacola, you should definitely be watching closely. It would behoove you to be watching closely. And for everybody out there, we have just around 600 viewers. I want to emphasize again, we are all watching. We just need to be watching closely on the Gulf of Mexico coast. Let's give it a couple more model runs. Let's get the recon aircraft in there for a few more missions so we can get some fresh data into all of our hurricane analysis data, all of our hurricane analysis models, and then we can start to make a much clearer determination. Now, I would hope, I say this as nicely as possible, but with as impactful as this hurricane season has been, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom in again so I can kind of communicate this to you, I would hope that with as impactful as this season has been, everybody along the Gulf of Mexico coastline from Texas to Florida should have all sorts of leftover gear, equipment, incidentals, and safety tools for the hurricane season. It is now November 3rd. we've had since before the season back in May, when a lot of our preseason forecasts started to, quote, hype this hurricane season up. I'm using air quotes because obviously this has verified. We've had a very, very dangerous and destructive hurricane season. We should have lots of our stuff left over, so you should be ready to kind of just make a quick adjustment in your preparation and then be ready to go if this thing does start to come your way. Now, what I'd like to do is show you a couple of the recent updates in terms of the model data. So if you take a look at the GFS for 18Z, now 18Z, take it with a grain of salt because 18Z is typically the happy hour model run. However, I will give it a little bit of credit because it doesn't do anything outlandish. It doesn't bomb this thing out. But as again, you can see here, two things. Number one, we're trending a little bit stronger with the front that's over the Southern Plains, Dixie Alley area. That's given them some severe weather up there. The GFS originally had a much weaker front that dissipates before this thing even gets into the Gulf of Mexico. We've trended to a stronger solution, which is what the Canadian model has actually had on the model runs for quite a bit of time right now. Now, this is why I want us paying attention. Cayman Islands, if you look, we're already looking at a potential hurricane as it moves through your area, deepening to about 980 to 985 millibars as it tracks through late on Tuesday during the day and into dusk. Sunset time is when the worst of this feature will be on top of you. It should be fairly compact in nature. This is not going to be a huge Helene or a huge Wilma-style storm where it covers a large surface area. This should be fairly compact, just like we saw with Milton, which is another reason why, give and take, small, yes, but smaller typically means they can deepen faster if they're given the opportunity to do so. You follow this up and you can see this actually does take it much closer to the state of Florida. I'll zoom us down into the southeast. This is right off our coast. Yes, a compact system, but the key takeaways here are the coastal impacts, higher winds right along the coastline, potential storm surge, and then look at all that heavy rainfall for much of the peninsula. We still have flood warnings in effect for river crossings and rivers that are overflowing even right now. We don't need any more rain, and even if this thing gives us a close graze to the west, we could still see 2, 4, maybe even 6 inches of rainfall towards the west side of the state that could create more dangerous river flooding, especially localized rainfall that piles up in ponds in areas already previously impacted by the river flooding induced by Milton. Then from there, you can see before it moves into the Big Bend, it washes out thanks to the wind shear and becomes nothing more than a remnant low. And then look at this. We have another system, kind of like a Publix buy one, get one, where it comes down towards the Florida Straits, maybe scrapes the very southernmost tip of Florida. Now, we're going to watch this. I only want to bring that up just so it's on your radar. We're not locked in on that just yet. We're not seeing a whole lot of model agreement besides the Euro AI, the GFS, and the Icon brings a little wishy-washy wave thing, perturbation down through that area. So we need to be watching. We need to keep our head on a swivel, most definitely. This is very weird. Is this November or is it September? I'll take you over to the European AI model. This is the 12Z model run, and you can see that the AI model has been locked in with a weakening system on approach to the state of Florida before it also makes that westward shift with the rebuilding of a high pressure up over the Appalachians, the mid-Atlantic states. And then there's that other feature, a little weak boundary or low pressure that stays fairly disorganized. If you look at the mean sea level anomaly, you can see it right there kind of button up against the east coast of Florida. No cause for alarm just yet, but it still could be a potential rainmaker, adding to what Milton left for us a couple weeks back, what this thing might leave for us, and then adding to those rainfall totals. So again, the rainfall and the flood risk with everything that's going on in the tropics, it just seems like the mother lode right now. In November, we just need to be paying close attention to what threats we have on the table, and the threats primarily for Florida and much of the southeast is going to be the heavy rainfall. Let's see, do we have anything? We do not have our model data in just yet. So one thing that's a bummer about Tropical Tidbits is when they redesignate a system, we lose all previous model data. I would have liked to have shown you some of the earlier model runs from the hurricane models before we get ready to wrap up. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and take some questions. We're going to get ready to close out the stream right now. Let's see here. We have a lot of people watching right now. As a matter of fact, maybe I shouldn't stop just yet. It's 9:04. Let's go ahead and let's keep going. Let me go ahead and we'll bring this back over. I'll show you some of the ensembles. So the 18Z ensembles from the GFS do have this coming very close to the west coast of Florida. They are all bunched up right up against the west coast of Florida, and we're actually seeing an increase in model agreement for that next system right here, if you look, going into the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas. So we could very well have a Publix BOGO deal with these features. They don't look the most intense. We're not talking a Francis, a Gene, and Andrew on the East Coast, and we're not we're not talking a Charlie, Ian, Wilma, and even a Milton now on our West Coast. So we do have that going for us. We are still very early in the game, despite not having too much lead time with these features, but they're all still very much so worth watching. And if you look, the GFS is actually thinking we could possibly get something else down in the Caribbean with such a strong pulse of the MJO going through. This is why I wrote that web story, the grand finale of the hurricane season. We are now getting ready to rock and roll and ride it out together. Here's a look at the European ensembles. Now, the Euro keeps this much weaker, which has kind of been part of the course for much of this hurricane season. I have a big bone to pick with the European model because I don't know why it wants to be so bearish and so conservative with these features. And I do think that's another reason why all the ensembles shifted west and then all of a sudden recurve that puppy back up. I don't know if you guys can see. Let me go ahead and pull up. Well, no, we'll stay right here. This is fixed for tropical tidbits. I'm not going to go adjusting my overlay, but if you look, once it gets to about the Bay of Campeche, the western Gulf of Mexico, if I click a couple more panels forward, a large chunk of these ensembles actually ricochet off of our next frontal feature and go back up towards New Orleans and the Florida Panhandle. If you look, some of them do take a very harsh right turn back towards the Florida Panhandle. Now, the Euro ensembles are not falling in love with that next system as much. It's expecting a lot more land interaction, moving over Hispaniola and the southern Turks and Caicos Islands as a rainmaker, which will likely prevent it from developing. And then maybe as it gets into the Caribbean, it tries to do a little something. You can see one random rogue member right there bringing a hurricane into the Yucatan, but this is the European model, so take that with a grain of salt. I know this sounds weird, but again, we got to give credit where credit is due. The GFS spotted this system at about the 300-hour mark, and now we're looking at PTC 18, so I'm putting just a little bit more cautious stock, keyword cautious. I'm putting cautious stock in the GFS because, the Euro, we still have to give it its kudos as well. It's done a decent job where it's expected to do a decent job. And then finally, just like with the GFS, we're also showing further lowering pressures down there in the Caribbean with what should be the exit phase of the MJO. Last but certainly not least, the Canadian model. The Canadian model still takes a large majority of these members up the west coast, the spine of Florida, up towards the Big Bend, before a few of them lump together and head back towards Louisiana. Here comes that next area of low pressure that's designated as the O for 20 per the Hurricane Center. It develops a little bit further to the south, according to the Canadian model, very similar to that of the European model, taking a bit more of a southerly track, interacting with the islands of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, maybe getting into Jamaica a little bit as a disorganized rainmaker before it tries to do something, and then, God forbid, it lifts back up into the Gulf of Mexico again. So it's going to be a very tricky pattern. It's honestly, if I could be very personal with you all, I'm astonished that we're doing this right now because we had a couple of blips last hurricane season, and we had PTC 22 early November that didn't end up doing anything, and it is now November 3rd. And we might have some bona fide systems on the board still. We have Tropical Storm Patty. Patty is still out there, just to let you all know. Tropical Storm Patty, albeit is kind of washing out right now. If you look at the satellite image, it has transitioned from subtropical to more tropical as it makes its way towards a Europe landfall. This is still rocking and rolling out there. So we do have Patty. Rafael is the next name on the list. You take a look at the satellite, and you can kind of see where that see that? See the little cyclonic curvature where my mouse is right here? Actually, I don't think you can see my mouse, unfortunately. Can you? No, doesn't look like it. But I'm sure you all can see where that mid-level circulation is very slowly spinning. Now, see where your thunderstorms are firing? That's what I mean by they are misaligned. They're not over top one another. So this system is not quickly deepening just yet. So I want to see what it looks like in the morning before we go crazy and start sounding the alarm on a hurricane for Jamaica, hurricane for the Cayman Islands. Hurricane for the Cayman Islands does look a little bit more likely. Sad to say, Jamaica, not so much. We're still up in the air. We're looking at a toss-up. But either way, Either way, we need to be paying close attention to these features, whether or not you're in the Caribbean or in the United States. We could have a possible 2-for-1 deal, unfortunately, for November, something we would typically see in August, September. So we are definitely in very, very treacherous waters. And when I say that, I just mean things are going to be very tricky. This is kind of like the Goonies and the booby traps when they were looking for One-Eyed Willie's treasure, for my Goonies fans out there. For those of you who are familiar with that Steven Spielberg gem of a classic. What questions do we have in the chat, though? Let's see. Dave's are taking over. I hate this time change. It feels so much later. It does. It's only 9:09. It feels like it's almost 11 o'clock already. Please go ahead and click that like button. We do have a lot of people. We have almost 800 people watching right now. Let's go ahead and smash, or I should say give it a little nudge, as we say over on Weather Center Nazario. Give that like button a little nudge. Let's get the algorithm back on Just Weather's side. Someone, Mimi Love Good Law, actually just mentioned it. If you like Jonathan and Naz to be seen on the algorithm, hit that like. Everyone deserves to be informed without being in fear, and that's precisely the point. We frown upon anyone striking fear. I will live and die by the phrase that weather is very similar to being in the medicinal field. You know, when you go to the doctor's office, I have a very close relative of mine in the hospital right now for a very intricate procedure. You know, God bless him, and we're rooting for him, and we love him to death, and we're really hoping he pulls through unscathed, scot-free. But for example, in a situation like that, you don't want the doctor to come in and say, yeah, this is a rough procedure. You're probably going to lose your legs, but, you know, there's always a chance, right? No, you want them to come in and say, we're going to do our very best to do this as properly and proficiently as possible and get you out of walking, you know, get you here walking home and safe and sound back to your loved ones at a moment's notice. And I will take that to the grave here as a meteorologist. No one wants to constantly hear about you're all going to get wiped out. No, you want to hear, you know, things could get a little bad, but we're going to give you all the information that you need in a timely manner to make those wise decisions and stay safe. And we all ride this out digitally or physically together. So yes, please give that like button a little nudge, and let's get the algorithm back on the Just Weather page. David Lee, YT, David, seeing this trend, do you think we will potentially have tropical cyclones during the month of December? I do not know. At this point in time, I can honestly say I don't know, because we do have one last small pulse of a Kelvin wave coming through, and if we have any leftover moisture, any open field for no wind shear and no dry air, we could possibly see something down in the Caribbean. Now, I'm not going to say anything about the United States, because even right now, we're not too certain this thing's going to survive its trek into the hostile Gulf of Mexico. We're going to dial that in here within the next day or two, but, you know, we'll have to wait and see. Hope that this doesn't turn into another hurricane. Looks a lot like Helene living in Western North Carolina. It's the last thing we need. Red Areno, I completely agree with you. I 100% agree with you, and we will let you know if this does give us the same warm and fuzzies as Helene does. And I don't mean that positively. I'm not saying warm and fuzzies and we're excited, but we had that confidence that Helene could get big, and it did. Could it rapidly intensify? Richard Lee Green, yes. In the Caribbean, there is that potential, depending on how organized it does get. Naz, when is the more permanent cold front will arrive in Florida? So it should hopefully be within the next 2 weeks, give or take. We're going to be having a front come through, but I'm not too sure how far to the southeast it will make it, because we are expecting ridging to be built in, and that could possibly be what knocks this system west but avoids a Florida landfall. Right now, Robert Peters, for Central Florida, anywhere between 2 to 4 inches currently on average, 2 to 4 inches. Watches, when can we expect them for Pensacola? Front desk, we still have a while. We definitely still have a while before we get to Pensacola or any Gulf coastline watches. Outside of maybe the Florida Keys, if it takes more of an H-Mon or an H-Wharf iteration. The H-Mon and the H-Wharf have it a little bit closer to Florida than the HAFS A and B models do. So we're still dialing in the track, even with our actual deterministic hurricane models. Make it a little ugly, but what's going to talk about Hillsborough when she will hit South Carolina? Benjamin Brown, I'm not too sure what you mean by your comment. Ricardo, thank you for tuning in from Jamaica. Sorry to hear we got battered here. 6 feet of storm surge from Helene and Milton. That's Daddy Shark. But alrighty, folks, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I got to go shoot some stuff behind the scenes, going to be getting in the studio here very soon. If you're still awake and local to Central Florida and you want to watch the 11 o'clock show, I'll be going on the broadcast side of the spectrum here in about an hour-ish, hour and a half, we'll say. I believe we're going to be starting late because of the football games, but either way, I hope to see you guys there. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Once again, give that like button a little nudge, share this information out, and since this isn't my channel, this is not my I mean, it is. Jonathan says it is because I'm with him now, but you know what I mean. I still say this is his baby, so I tread lightly, but I will absolutely say, please consider clicking that subscribe button and making sure your notifications are turned on because you do not want to miss another recurring tropical update over the next few days, as well as what your winter weather looks like once we can finally close out the 2024 hurricane season and say bon voyage, peace, as Will Smith would say on Independence Day. So definitely consider clicking subscribing. The News 6 weather team, we will definitely keep you sheltered and keep you up to speed on everything prevalent to the weather in your neck of the woods, regardless if you are in Central Florida or not. And we will talk to you again very soon. I'm not going to say the old slogan because we are not on the Weather Center, but this is News 6 meteorologist David Nazario signing out.